Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. My name's Holly Snape and I am the chair of Community Networks Aotearoa, and I have the honour of opening this evening's proceedings. The panel has been brought to you by Community Networks Aotearoa and Sue Barker Law. Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. This is really an opportunity for discussion, for listening and connection between our sector and the political leaders ahead of this election. We're grateful to have representatives from 6 political parties today, and we're really thankful for their willingness to engage with us in the issues and aspirations for our communities. We're also really pleased to have Jehan Casinader down here, respected journalist and storyteller, joining us tonight to facilitate this conversation. So thank you very much for coming along. The community and volunteer sector plays a really vital role in the well-being of Aotearoa, supporting people, strengthening communities and advocating for equality and inclusion. This afternoon is an opportunity to explore how we can work together to create thriving communities for everyone. I just want to open today with a short karakia, and if you know it, please feel free to join in. Whakatakata hou ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tara ki tai. Ihi aki ana te atukura, hei tio, hei huka, hei huhu, ti hei mauri ora. Thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Jehan.
Thank you, Holly. Kia ora, everyone. He mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Warm greetings to you all and welcome to this election panel event hosted by Community Networks Aotearoa. Now, the election, as we all know, is 6 months away, so we are getting in early tonight, and we're very grateful to our 6 MPs for joining us. Community Networks Aotearoa invited all parties currently represented in Parliament to participate in tonight's conversation, and all of them have chosen to attend with the exception of Te Pāti Māori. An invitation was also extended to the Opportunity Party as the highest polling party currently outside Parliament. So joining us today, Dana Kirkpatrick from National, Helen White from Labour, Andy Foster from New Zealand First, Mike Davidson from the Greens, Laura McClure from ACT, and Kayla Kingdon-Bebb from the Opportunity Party. Let's give them a round of applause and a welcome. So we will begin with a substantive discussion with our MPs, and then we have plenty of time for questions from the floor from our audience joining us here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. Now, just a note before we climb into this, tonight we are talking about the community sector as a whole. You'll also hear words like charity and not-for-profit. These are not necessarily the same thing. So we have about 29,000 registered charities in New Zealand, and they are regulated by the government, and they are part of a larger not-for-profit sector. That's much greater. There's over 100,000 not-for-profits here in Aotearoa, and that includes unregistered community groups, trusts, and other types of organisations as well. And all of those organisations make up the broader community sector. So that's a little bit of framing for our conversation this evening. So I'd like to give each of our MPs a chance in 60 seconds or so to give you a snapshot of their party's vision for the community sector. And I think we take it as a given that all of these individuals care deeply about the work that you're doing. I'm sure that they'll reiterate that in their remarks. But tonight we want to get as specific as possible about their plans and tools and strategies that they are lining up to benefit and strengthen your sector if they're in government after this year's election. So we will go along the line, beginning with you, Dana. Welcome.
Thank you, Jehan. Oh, I need to use this.
Yes.
I need to use this. Thank you so much for having us here. Look, I think it's fair to say that the National Party fully recognises that without the community and voluntary sector, the country would be in a very different space. And I just want to thank all of you for the work that you do. We recognise the value of volunteers. I think about 53% of all New Zealanders do volunteering in some capacity. And we know that they fill the roles in all sorts of places, like volunteer firefighters, like people who raise money for all of those charitable entities, and the crossover between charities and the not-for-profit or community sector is massive. So we are fully supportive and want to do the best we can with the resources that we have to ensure that the voluntary and community sector is supported in the way that we can all work together for a better New Zealand.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana. Over to Andy.
Yeah, look, I'm going to start off also by saying thank you for all the work that you do, because without that voluntary sector, as Dana has just said, our society effectively would not exist as a society. So the work you do, thank you so much. And whether that's in the areas of health or welfare or looking after people who are disadvantaged, or environment, whatever it might be, sporting organisations, churches and religious organisations, really important. So New Zealand First is really keen to keep on working with you. Partnership between government and the voluntary sector, really important. And if there are ways in which we can improve that, keen to do that. Obviously there is support to some degree through the charitable sector in terms of tax deduction, which we obviously support, continuing to keep operating to make sure that it is more attractive for people to give money to the voluntary and charitable sector. But we want to keep on working with you and supporting your sector. So thank you again for what you do.
Thank you, Andy.
Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Thanks so much for having Opportunity along tonight. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Opportunity sees the charitable and not-for-profit sector as a critical pillar of a healthy democracy, of our resilient economy, and of strong local communities. And I'm really pleased that that's our party's position, because I'm in the charitable sector. In my day job, I'm the chief executive of WWF, the pandas, not the wrestlers. I had to clarify that. Yeah. Core to our policies is around ending divisive politics, building a productive economy, and restoring nature. And the charitable and not-for-profit sector is really important to all of those things. This sector is the home of innovation. You're really core to fiscal efficiency within our economy. You're very big. The charitable sector does a lot of preventative care, which is important in all sorts of aspects of social and health and in the environmental sector. So there's lots of things that work, and we know that there's a lot of growth potential. So with an intergenerational wealth transfer, there's things that New Zealand can be doing to capitalize on the productive capacity of this sector. And we're very keen to talk to you about that. Kia ora.
You've got a microphone there.
Give that back.
Gives us a sign of things to come in this discussion. Over to you, Helen.
Kia ora. My name's Helen White, and I am I've got this portfolio. I've also got another, which is the prevention of sexual and family violence. And the two were incredibly interesting to have together, because in one you could see the example of what was failing in the other, I think. So the first thing I'd like to just comment on is my experience of watching really the sector be trashed. We had an example, which was the minister talking about the groups that were doing wonderful work in sexual and family violence, and they were accused of using the government as cash cow. And it was something that was just so counter to the reality that I was dealing with, where these organisations were just working so hard on the smell of an oily rag, and where we had asked more and more of them, and we'd asked them to be proxies for the government. So the first part of my approach to this is they are not. They are not a proxy for the welfare state. They are not a proxy for what the government should be doing as part of its social contract obligations. But they are a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for localism, for creativity, for people getting in and empowering themselves. So I see this as an area that's incredibly important, but it hasn't had quite that vision of the right kind of mindful partnership with government. And I am conscious that some of those organisations that we're talking about want no part of government, and good for them. There's a role well beyond that as well. So I hope that gives you a flavour. I've got lots of things on my strategy on this, but a lot of them relate to the ecosystem that we need to create, and obviously the opportunity that we've got right now with a whole lot of people who are making their wills. And we need to make sure that the money comes into the sector and we grow the sector in a way where there's a lot of different possibilities.
Thank you, Helen. Mike?
It's way over a minute.
That's all right.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Mike Davidson, takunua. It's really great to be here today, and it feels like we're starting this election campaign with probably one of the most important sectors that we have, and for someone that's sort of just come into Parliament recently, working for a charitable company, I know the value of the sector, and the Green Party also supports this sector and sees the sector as a core partner in delivering social, environmental and community well-being. It's not an add-on, and I've seen firsthand the pressure that has been put on the sector from under-investing in the sector, underfunding, and it creates such a headache for people that are trying to deliver so much good. And the Green Party, our values are around thriving communities that, I guess, work together in harmony with themselves and the planet. They're not there to replace government, they're there to work alongside and support working together and not instead of. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Look at that, it's a hot mic. Kia ora everybody, my name is Laura. I'm obviously with the ACT Party. What I would firstly like to say is echo some of my colleagues' sentiments around thank you so much for everything that you do in our communities. When I think of community organisations, I think of our NGOs, our charities on the ground, I think about my own community and I think of what that place would be like if we didn't have you out there filling those gaps that the government doesn't fill. And it might be quite surprising to some of you in the room because the ACT Party believes in like a smaller government, really efficient government, but what we also believe in is decentralisation. We believe that those that are on the ground in the communities actually have the answers, not central government. So we believe in devolution right down into communities. We believe in the communities actually delivering for the people, where it's probably actually where we align a bit with the Greens on some of this stuff. So I'm really keen, it is election year, we're thinking of our policies right now. I'm really keen to hear from everybody in this room about how we can do things better, whether it's getting government out of your way, making regulations easier, making procurement easier. How do you want us to help you and serve you better? And I think that's a conversation all of us are willing to have today.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. All right, let's start with the question of tax. At the end of 2024, the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, announced a consultation on the tax status of charities and really signalled that change would be imminent in this area. She said that the government wanted to, quote, close any loopholes that are being exploited that would allow entities that are structured as charities to avoid the tax they should otherwise pay. IRD, as many of you know, did a review, and as a result of that review, the government decided that it wouldn't proceed with changes to tax law at that time. Dana, what was the reason for that decision?
Well, my understanding is that the Minister, Nicola Willis, announced just prior to the budget last year that the review would not make changes to charitable tax law. And my understanding is that the submissions process, so listening to everything that everybody told us, was there was a great deal of complexity in the system, and that it wasn't quite just as simple, and the return on it was not nearly as great as one had previously imagined. And so, therefore, the tax, any changes to the charitable tax law were shelved at that point. And I am not aware of any further discussions around that or of continuing that at this stage.
Helen, what did you make of that process and the result?
Okay, so this was when I first got the portfolio and when talked to people in the sector about it, and I was really concerned. So I'm absolutely thrilled that this got rolled back because I think it would have been a terrible misstep. This is really about the confusion over what a charity is. And one of the, I think Sue Barker's probably somewhere right now looking at me. We had a very enlightening discussion, but it became actually an area where I really found out how that system works. And I think the only thing that we're probably lacking, Sue and others, is I don't think we've wrapped around the charities in the way with IRD to make sure that there aren't exploitations that give charities bad names. There are abuses, so we should deal with the abuses. We should not change a system that allows different status to something that is so good for our community.
So why is it then that the classic examples we often see, not just in the media but in public discourse, Sanitarium,
Yes.
Destiny Church, etc., get held up as examples of widespread abuse or exploitation
think it's-
when there's 29,000 organisations
You're
in the
right.
sector?
So I think there is a confusion over things like Sanitarium, where in fact the money is asset locked back into the community. But I think there are also some examples like the Wright Foundation, where there were things done that, and we might not all agree on that, but I think that they were things that should have been looked at and dealt with under the law as it was, and it's really needing a crack team to look at that stuff so it doesn't get exploited.
Interested in the perspective of the two other parties in the government. Andy, what are your thoughts on the results of this review?
Well, I think the complexity is quite clear, but I think charities as a whole, when you mentioned the 27,000 odd charities, they were, as I understand, they were never the target. That was never the issue, but it was those things which
They were the target.
Those
Well,
gonna be everywhere.
look, Helen, you've had your go. But my understanding is they were never intended to be the target. The target was, if anything, is it a fair regime to have the likes of, you mentioned Sanitarium, Destiny Church and so on, you might mention some of the iwi organisations as well, which are not often not taxed on the profits they make because of the way they actually use those profits to distribute them. So I think that was the issue. Obviously very, very complicated, but it wasn't something which was an issue across the charities as a whole, and certainly we will be very opposed to removing any of that support for the charitable sector through the tax system.
But Laura, isn't it also true that the law requires those organisations to spend any profits from social enterprise for charitable purposes? So aren't there already provisions within the law to prevent that kind of abuse?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think there are provisions in the law currently. The thing is, sitting in a Member of Parliament seat, all of us would have at some point of time received an email complaint about the operations of a charity, concerns around, is it a business enterprise or is it actually a charitable enterprise? And there are issues with that, because the ones that are out there doing everything on the smell of an oily rag, they are the credible ones. So I think the government is right into looking into it. And I think that it is far more complex to the other MPs' positions that we all now know. Does it mean that we do nothing about it? I don't think so. I think there is room in the scope around what actually defines a charity and charitable purposes. A lot of countries similar to New Zealand have had these conversations, and I think it's something that we do need to have as an ongoing conversation to make sure that the sector doesn't fall into any kind of disrepute, and that people feel confident as well. So yeah, look, I think that is a continuing conversation, but in no way is it the review meant to shine a torch on everybody that's doing great work out there. I think it's actually to make sure that the industry itself or charities are actually protected.
But Mike, the message that I've heard from many of the people in this room is that there was a spotlight that was put on the sector, and the message was, we don't trust you and we're going to scrutinise all of you to see where we can extract more money in a sector that generates $20 billion a year. And what the review found was that the gains would only be about 50 million. That was how things washed up from the review. What was your perspective of the impact of that?
This is one of the things, like, the sector delivers so much, and they always come to scrutiny when they shouldn't be. And we know there is exceptions, and you do need a bit of a case by case and have a look at some of the organisations, because while we got so many great organisations that are delivering community benefit, and that is at the heart of everything they do, there are the odd ones that are looking to actually put profits into private hands, and it's essential that there's the mechanism to ensure that that doesn't happen, but we can't actually let down the sector while we're doing that. We need to support the sector at the same time.
What does the Opportunity Party have to say about these recent developments?
Well, the Opportunity Party believes that we need to have a mature conversation about tax in this country, full stop. And I think, reform to how charitable organizations are treated could reasonably be part of that. But from my perspective, and again, this is someone who was in the sector and sort of felt the weight of government looking to police you or scrutinize you when you're just running on the smell of an oily rag, I think the approach with which that undertaking was approached was kind of fundamentally wrong. I think our view at Opportunity would be noting how productive this sector is, how much it contributes to Aotearoa New Zealand, A better way to approach it would be to say, what can we do to uplift this sector? What can we do from a tax perspective that will better serve the needs of the charitable sector and the not-for-profit organizations? And if we want to address these issues around, certain bad actors claiming taxable deductions tax relief when it's not appropriate, that's fine. But the fundamental framing was not one of service or uplifting to the sector itself, and I think that is the heart of the problem there.
Dana, isn't one of the messages that the sector has received for many years been, we want you to find new sources of revenue, we want you to innovate, and as a result we've seen the growth of social enterprise and businesses, and then when you have these other streams of income coming in, that can bring about more scrutiny or more suspicion in some cases about where that money's actually going. Are those mixed messages for the sector?
I don't think that a review is a bad thing at the end of the day. I think that anybody should be open to review, and I think what you've seen in this sector is that the review was conducted and there was no change, and that's a good thing, right? So that's the right result for you as a sector. In terms of mixed messages, look, we all know that it's getting harder and harder as a charity to raise money. Money is harder to come by, volunteers are hard to get. It is becoming more and more critical to spend every dollar as you best can. But the philanthropic giving in New Zealand is one of the most, we are one of the most giving countries in the world, and we do enormous. I think something like I wrote the figure down. $3.8 billion in philanthropic giving in New Zealand is a phenomenal result, and that's because of the work that you do and the support you get from the community. So I think we are always going to have to look for new ways of finding money, and we are always going to have to look at how we manage that in a charitable and not-for-profit sector. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying.
But it's not just that review, is it? Because the IRD also looked at taxing the membership fees of non-profits. And again, there was a big reaction from the sector because for many organisations, the membership fees, that's their primary source of income. There was also discussion around fringe benefit tax for non-profits. So I guess the point is what the sector seems to be saying from what I can see is that there's a picture emerging where the support isn't there, but actually the government is looking for more ways to extract money from us or create more regulations when many of these organisations are simply struggling to keep the doors open. Many of you have used that phrase, running on a smell of an oily rag. Isn't there an imbalance in the conversation here, Andy?
Well, I think probably the key thing I think that we're hearing from this is that we need to be sending very positive signals, and I think that's the point you made, send positive signals rather than ones that can be seen as being threatening. Sometimes I'm not quite sure I'm not close to what IRD is doing in terms of the way in which what they're investigating, and maybe their remit is to go and have a look at everything that they can. Some of them maybe they possibly should back off a little bit. But I would think about some of the. There was a comment made about people providing in their wills for giving to charities and to foundations, etc. Now I'm not quite sure what the tax arrangements are for that, but my understanding is that there is no tax deduction for that. Now, of course, it doesn't go to it would be a state rather than, but it might encourage, if there was, it might encourage people to give more, knowing that some will come back, so they're more willing to give more to the charities, knowing that some will come back to their state and they're happy with that balance, and it might change the balance a little bit. Maybe that's one of the things that could be looked at. And one of the other things I would say is that there are some organisations which currently rely on giving and on the charitable sector to some degree, which we think as a party the state should step up a little bit more on, and I particularly think of the ambulance sector. Of course, when we fund the police, fire and emergency is funded in a way which is basically not, there's no charitable element in that either, but we do require that for some reason of the ambulance service. Not quite sure why, and we've had a long-standing position that perhaps we shouldn't be doing that way, that the government should be stepping up a little bit more. Maybe you keep a little bit there, but I think it's about sending the right signals, and the signal is you guys are loved, need to be shown that love, and I think that's the key.
Do any of you have concerns that there is unexplained money sloshing around in the sector? There were some figures bandied around. The figure was $2 billion. The idea that charities bring in a certain amount of money each year and they spend less than that money, and the gap was $2 billion. And so there was a lot of commentary in the media around, well, are they sitting on it? Are they misusing it? Where is that money going? Charities responded by saying, we're saving it, we've allocated it for future projects, we're being fiscally prudent. Do any of you have any concerns around that gap at all between what's coming in each year and what's being spent?
Well, can I just, from my point of view, just because I was just speaking, I possibly, there might be some, again, there's always going to be some people who are doing things in a way which possibly they shouldn't, but by and large, it's exactly those kind of things. First one is you've got to be solvent. You've got to have some money in the bank, because if you haven't got any money in the bank, you can't keep doing what you're doing. So you need to do that. You need to be in a position where you're actually making more. Over time, you get more money coming in than goes out, because otherwise you're not going to be there. And the second one is quite reasonably, and I was chair of a charitable trust at one stage, and we were deliberately trying to keep some money aside so we didn't have to send all the money out the door, because we knew that there were some big projects, and we wanted to make sure that the money that we used was going to give the best possible benefit to our community. And that doesn't mean you say, first come, first served. Sometimes you say, what are the projects that we know are coming, and you're sitting down and talking with those organisations saying, how can we deliver the best value that we can for the limited money that we've got to our community?
I think it's a very good point that you raise, and there are some instances where there's been some misconception, and I know of one in my electorate where an organisation was accused of storing money away, if you like, from a government contract, and I think that's where it gets a bit messy if you've got a government contract and you're a charitable organisation, and you seem to be having a better looking balance sheet at the end of the year. Then people get a bit concerned because it's government money and you shouldn't be, the theory is you shouldn't store that away for a rainy day. But when you are delivering well over and above your contract terms and you are succeeding everything that's been asked of you, I think there's a different conversation to have, and I think that was how that one played out as well.
So you're all being very agreeable and very reasonable tonight, which is great. But I guess the question that raises in my mind is, where has all of this... I know you are, but where has all of this come from? Because it hasn't come out of thin air. The questions that I'm asking are informed by months and months of discussion and policy conversations and political statements, including from the three governing parties. So why are we in this? Why are we even having this conversation if that's the case? Helen?
You let me.
Here she goes.
I mean, look, there are several things that are, if I had to unpack your question, there is the kind of floating balances, but there's also the issue I raised right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Actually accusing some of our amazing charities of using the government as a cash cow. Now, those statements were made by this government, and it turned out they were completely false. And I think what was interesting about that was that we weren't really embracing the kinds of contracts we need for organisations to do a good job for government. They've got to be relational high trust contracts. They've got to have flexibility in them. They've got to be able to say, this is working here and we're going to take this over here, which was happening, and it got a big kick in that statement, and it should have got a lot more publicity than it did. And we actually did have a report on that, and we were critical across parties of those statements and how wrong they were. But I think that mentality has no place, and it is not the answer to suggest that these organisations are exploiting the situation. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't occasionally get a bad apple, but that's why you need a crack team to deal with that stuff.
So before we move on from tax, it would just be great to hear from each party, if you're elected after this election, will you look at new, additional or different ways to tax the charitable sector? Laura?
No, absolutely not. Like, ACT is completely opposed to any new taxes, particularly on our charitable sector, so it's quite easy to say no to that.
Mike?
Not for the community sector where they're delivering really good community benefit.
I can't talk for my party because the policy's not out yet, but no, I would not. There's nothing in my strategy that would suggest any such new tax.
Kayla?
Opportunity has released a tax policy which does not directly speak to taxation on charities or not-for-profits, but our view is that the settings that were put forward, that we're putting forward with the citizens' income paired with the land value tax will actually make things a lot easier for the charitable sector. And beyond that, I would say I just want to reflect on Dana's point around the generosity of New Zealanders. The philanthropic sector in this country is about, what we said, $3.7 billion? $3.8 billion. It could be a lot more. New Zealand doesn't actually have tax settings for individuals that are conducive, particularly conducive to philanthropic giving. We're miles apart from other OECD comparables. Singapore, you can basically at cost recover 130% of a donation made domestically. The US is similar.
Okay.
When we're looking at the context of an incoming intergenerational wealth transfer, we should be looking at ways to better incentivize charitable giving. And there's so many ways that can be done in New Zealand that current governments, past governments haven't been interested in, and we would be.
Thank you. Andy?
The answer broadly is no. As I said, the key things here are the transparent relationship, that it's very clear. I mean, you've got the charities regulatory process at the moment, which I'm sure we're going to come to later on. So there is a way that everybody needs to report to that process to say, look, this is where our money's coming from. This is how we're using our money. This is what we're doing, and that's the kind of transparency we need. So that's absolutely fine. We believe that the charitable sector and the community sector do an enormous amount of good work, and in a sense, the tax arrangement, there's tax deductions, etc., and there's no tax paid by the tax deductions on donations. There's no tax paid by the organisations. Is the quid pro quo for that? You do a great job, and you deserve that recognition.
Thank you. Dana?
My understanding from our side is that there is no plan for taxing or intention to further tax the charitable not-for-profit sector.
Okay, great. Let's move on to funding. So we know that the sector is under a lot of financial pressure at the moment due to the effects of COVID, inflation, cost of living, all of these different factors. And we also know, here's another stat for you, that most of the non-profits in New Zealand are not funded through the government. So roughly a third of those organisations receive government contracts, government funding. So the question here is the current level of funding and government involvement sufficient? And given some charities are having to close their doors due to the financial pressures that they face, should the government step in, given that many of those services the government would otherwise have to pay for if there weren't community organisations to pick up the slack, or maybe those services wouldn't happen at all? Laura, what are your thoughts on the government's level of funding for this sector?
This is a really tricky question because it really depends on the service, of course, and what it is that we're funding, right? So we can't have like a blanketed approach. I alluded in my opening that the ACT Party's philosophy is devolving services to community to deliver as opposed to government delivering, and that's in a lot of areas. I also cover mental health for the party, and I know that Health NZ isn't always the best person to deliver services, particularly around like addiction, for example. So I do think there is ways that we can do that better. I know that if you are a small charity, even if you're a small business in New Zealand, accessing any type of contract with the government is really challenging, and I think that's something that we should try and address so that there is more opportunity for smaller organisations, businesses, etc., to be able to access part of that pie and deliver in the communities. But what I do think is we also need to create a better environment where there's not organisations competing with each other continually for the same kind of funding, that we get different organisations working in the same field together to be able to say, hey, these are the things we see in our community, let's work together, as opposed to competing for different pools of funding. But look, I think that it could be done better. I think handing out large amounts of money to cherry picking certain things is not ideal. I think that we need to look individually into each area and come up with plans that are better than what we're seeing right now. But yes, I do think we should move more away from the government delivery into the community delivery.
Andy, do you think we've taken these organisations for granted when you think about ambulances, when you think about social service delivery, and the true cost that the Crown would have to carry for delivering those services, and yet we rely on these organisations that in many cases are just struggling to keep employing their staff, or many of them have had contracts cancelled during this term?
I guess it probably depends on what your role is. I mean, if you're in government, if you're in that, if you happen to be the minister who's involved in those areas, you're probably not taking them for granted because you're absolutely you're focused on those areas. But if you're not, you're probably not so much. And if it's just seems to be going on okay, you're not necessarily paying a lot of attention until somebody says, "Hey, there's a problem." Can I just pick up a couple of things that I've heard as regular frustrations in terms of government funding? One of them is this one-year funding arrangement. And that, we've got to change that. Because the amount of time, I see lots of nods there, the amount of time that it takes for somebody to fill out funding applications and the uncertainty which that leaves you with, and often if you're employing staff or you want to get involved and you need a contract or a lease or whatever it might be, and you don't know that your funding is going to arrive until, it might be you start in 1 July and you don't know the funding, still haven't got the funding and it's May, what on earth are you doing? That's completely unreasonable. So we have to change that. For organisations, where government has had a long-term relationship, one organisation I've been working with in the education sector, government says it's fantastic, a wonderful job, and government's been saying that for 20-odd years, and they're still required to do a funding application every year. That is nuts, and that's the sort of thing that needs to change. So we can be much more supportive in those areas. The second thing I wanted to say is just about empowering. I think often we get a huge amount more benefit out of community organisations doing things than, with due respect, government bureaucracies doing things. You're more efficient, you're more careful with the money, you're more aligned with the people that you're serving, and you're also often less scary. And I think particularly in the environmental area, so we've got, you look in the hills around Wellington, we've got Capital Kiwi who are doing the work they're doing, they've released Kiwi, they've been working with landowners. If that had been DOC doing that, or if that had been the council doing that, would those landowners have said yes? I don't think they would have done. But when it's a community organisation, they're interested. So empowering community to do what community does best is something which we need to do a whole lot better.
Dana, do you think that the government is acting as a good partner with the community sector?
Well, you'd have to ask the community sector, I suppose. But the government will always say that it values we value the community sector. We do put quite a lot of money into contracts in the community sector, and I think one of the things, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the Social Investment Agency and that, but it's kind of in that vein, is that we can do better. We spend a huge amount of money, I think, as Andy alluded to, but also in the reporting and monitoring and administration of contracts for charitable and not-for-profit organisations, which takes out half the money. I can tell you in Tairāwhiti, we spend, which is where I come from, Gisborne, we spend $1.5 billion a year on social sector contracts, and less than about half of that never leaves the building. So it actually doesn't get to the front line. And I think if we look at the social investment approach and how we use the money better, how we use data and evidence and better contracting so that we don't have people... We have agencies in Tairāwhiti with 25, 35, 40 contracts, and they have to hire people specifically to fill in the reporting and the monitoring. And I don't know, many of you will have filled in some of those MB or other agency reports. They are mind-blowing and really make you lose the will to live some days. But that money could be better spent on the front line doing the work that you want to do.
But isn't it also true that despite the amount of money that's spent on the sector, the rates at which the government procures these services are much lower than they would? There's heaps of research to support this than if the government had to contract private businesses, for example, to procure the same services. On top of that, you have the compliance burden that you've both just described, and Andy very aptly pointed out this move towards one-year contracts, which many of the organisations have noticed more of in this term. So you layer all those things up and go, A, we as taxpayers are not really paying for the true cost of these services, and actually it's the people in this room who are having to absorb the difference. Helen, what are your thoughts on that?
We were moving towards more relational contracts and longer contracts, and I think there was almost a consensus that was happening. And to see that shaken is really, really disappointing. I was an employment lawyer for 25 years. Precarious work is so bad for people and for our country, and actually that's what ends up happening in the sector, is you get a whole lot of people who are not secure, even though what they're choosing to do pays half what it would be if they were employed somewhere else, because they're actually committed. And I think we punish them, and I think that that's ridiculous. I think we need to build a whole ecosystem which actually allows us to live our values and values that. And I don't think we're doing that well.
So to any other member of the panel, how do we support the sector and build that workforce of people who are adequately compensated, have reliable tenure, are not hanging on, are we going to get another contract for the next 12 months,
so
etc.?
We have to do longer term contracts, and I like the idea of the Social Investment Agency, but I am concerned it's going to become political in its own right.
We'll come to that, yep.
And so, so I'm worried that it will shift money from across into kind of low-hanging fruit. And we've got to be actually able to let organisations take a bit of risk, sometimes fail. We have to have long enough contracts that they're not shifting from one place to another. At the moment, they go from our mental health service because that's paying, worse, to some other sector where they got in at pay equity before it got slammed off. It's that crazy. We've just got this movement of people, so we have to start to build the economy we want.
Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I can touch on my own experience because we were having government contracts to deliver some really good services at the organisation I work for, and originally they were over 2 or 3 year contracts. Getting to the end, they were going down to 6 months, and you just cannot plan on a 6-month contract, and the amount of pressure that also puts on the staff themselves, it's not acceptable. But I do want to touch on, I guess, my concern, and I think every time we start to see a push to reduce spending, etc., or even in local government rates, it always seems to be the community and the environment that gets impacted. I was a city councillor for 6 years, and I know the value for every dollar we spent in the community sector, the amount we were getting back. I think in 2022 it was like $8 for every $1. And back then they were still trying to reduce the amount of money we'd put in the community sector. And it's just, all you see is cracks into your community when you start actually not funding community properly. And it's my concern that I've seen is the fact that we keep underfunding in the community sector. And that has a huge flow-on effect to the community and the environment.
And I think the key point here is that most of the organisations that do get funding don't get the whole lot. So you still have to go out and find alternative funding sources, beg, borrow, rely on donations, bequests, whatever, to make up that difference. Kayla, Laura, is that a sustainable model?
Look, I think everybody has alluded to some of the issues that are happening, but one of the things that I see happening is actually the contracts themselves aren't flexible enough to change and deliver. So I think when we say, because we have a short-term contract to try and get a deliverable outcome, because the environment's changing, so the government might say, okay, now we want this instead. And then on the other hand, we had long contracts that were really rigid and not flexible enough to change. So I think there's something, from my position, what I see in the in-between. So you get that longer term contract and you get the assurity that you're going to have the financials there. But there needs to be that kind of rapport between the contract management around what it is actually needed. Because sometimes that changes. Actually, it changes a lot. And I see a lot of organisations that are adapting their models to deliver something else. And that's not okay. Like, that just shouldn't be happening. And we should be saying to the communities, what is it that you guys see as the needs? How are you going to deliver it? How much is that going to cost? What do you need to do to get there? Not, we want this in Wellington, make it happen. And I think that is really a massive problem, and it's something that we need to shift. So it's probably a combination of some of the things that they're saying here. And the other thing on the end of that is that there does have to be some kind of accountability back to the taxpayer, but we don't want it to be so burdensome that you're hiring an FTE to go along and do all these things and, track outputs and stuff like that. That's just ridiculous. But I think there does need to be something as well at the end of that. I'm not sure how that looks.
Kayla?
I think within this sector, we individually, our organizations know what a good contracting relationship looks like. I can speak personally. I have delivered projects with MFAT funding. I've delivered very similar projects with international philanthropic funding. Let me tell you, the MFAT funding is it's almost so much work that it's not worth trying to get it. Like, I can't cost recover overheads. I can't fully cost recover the cost of the project. There's no long-term security for my staff. Like, I have the exact opposite of that with bigger contracts that are internationally funded. Like, we know what works. So, putting my other hat on here, I think government just needs to implement that. We know what the ingredients for successful contracting and funding models are. Some of us in the sector are already doing them.
We just need to implement that. It's not that hard.
So given that we all agree on much of the substance of this, to the three parties that are currently in the coalition government, what's getting in the way? Why haven't we made progress on this when we've heard similar sentiments for years on many of these topics?
Me?
Any of you?
Okay, I'll start. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the social investment agency approach is the answer that we're looking to make that change, because that's where we want to specifically address the contracting problems and the issues that we've seen.
But the social investment agency isn't responsible for all government procurement, right? And in fact, it would be a relatively small amount compared to the total pool of contracting funding that's out there at the moment.
Not necessarily if you start with the community commissioning phase, which is where the pilots are intended at some point. So community commissioning would take the service, the agency contracts in that region and deliver them from a local perspective based on local data and evidence to deliver local outcomes. And I think that's where the change will come.
Laura? Oh, Andy?
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of things. Social investment agency, while promising, I don't want to be super critical of it because I am in government, but I do have my concerns around it. But I think it's the lack of, what would you call it? The lack of any type of standardisation across all of the government agencies when it comes to procurement. And I'm also a SME spokesperson, and this is the same for any type of small, medium business trying to work with government. So I think the Office of the Auditor General has done a report on some of this. There are lots of places we can go with it, but I think without saying any kind of election policy from ACT, I do think this is an area that we need to target and do it well. Yeah.
So before we move off, yes, go for it.
But I'm going to say there's probably two things that I think have probably almost become inherent in our society. One of them is that we can often be control freaks, and bureaucracies are very good at being control freaks, which means that they've got to have everything nailed down to the nth degree. And that reflects the other part of that is our risk aversion. And it's much better to get half, as Dana's example, I'd much rather get half the money out and make sure that all of it did what it was doing, rather than actually say, I'm going to take some risks and let something fail occasionally, and get 90% of the money out the door. And I wonder whether if we actually gave ourselves permission to fail, we will do a whole lot more, and that's across the board, not just in the charitable sector, but across the board. We take a few more risks, and I think we get a much better outcome. The other thing I might say is just in terms of the form filling out and all the other stuff, we make it less frequent. That'd be a good start. But the other one is, Kayla, you said that you know what they would look like. Why don't we co-design them? Why don't we co-design the process? I mean, that's not our policy, but it could become our policy. Why don't we co-design the process so that it is not as bureaucratic, not as overbearing as it is at the moment?
So just before we move off money, I'd love to hear from each of you. What's one thing that you're going to take away from this discussion that you are going to advocate for on behalf of the people in this room with your caucus colleagues? Dana? Well, more than one would be good, but one is a minimum.
Well, I think there's a lot we could do, but if I'm going to be specific, certainly the community commissioning for me is the thing that delivers better results that I would like to see the pilots to roll out in some of the regions of New Zealand. And I agree that the short-term contracts are an absolute pain for people. And I do like the idea of fixing up the reports. I've filled in those reports for a Kānoa MB project in a former life, and they are pretty harrowing to get your way through every month. It would take me just about a week of a month to do it, and I'm not particularly that slow at things, so okay. I get it.
Great.
I've circled around 6 things there. Working together, showing the love, co-designing processes, allowing people to take risks, the 1 yearly funding, and empowering community so that the community does some of the things so much better than governments or councils do.
Great. Kayla?
I don't think I need to fly the flag too much within opportunity because our policy is pretty consistent with what this sector would like to see. But I do have a personal bugbear on the Active Investor Plus visa pathway, which I would like to talk about very briefly. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that the balanced pathway for that Active Investor Plus visa includes philanthropy as a potential option, and it's never been used, which is a huge missed opportunity for this sector. And I would love to see some action on that in a future government.
Thank you. Helen?
What I take away from this is actually the capacity perhaps to have more cross-party on this. There are things that are surprising me that people are saying across this group. I haven't talked about some of the things that I've got in my portfolio, and I'm not sure if we're going to have time to do that. But given that you just did, I think I would say one of the things that I'm looking at is the social enterprise space. And I think we can develop a much better policy around that.
Okay, great. Mike?
Thanks. Probably going to echo a little bit of what's been said. It's actually been really good to hear us all kind of on the same page, but although that doesn't seem to reflect what's happening in real time and the pressure that's actually going on to community. But I think there's a lot that can be taken, especially like those multi-year funding, making it a lot more easier to report back. But I'm hopeful if this is the type of people we have across parties that we can actually get some good outcomes moving forward. But I do want to quickly highlight one thing that does concern me. And it's currently a bill that's going through Parliament, which is the system improvements for local government, which is changing how local government's meant to work in the core services. And when you read through it, I really think that the community is going to be the one that's going to feel the brunt of what's happening, and the potential pressure there's going to be on funding that goes towards community, especially if we see some rates capped, which is meant to come in. So that does concern me, what we're seeing coming through. So while we seem to talk on the same page, what I'm seeing from this government doesn't actually reflect what we're hearing.
Laura?
Yeah, look, it is very warming that we're quite collegial on this, and I think that says that we are hearing you guys and we do actually know that these are issues. These were the issues when I came into Parliament. They're still the issues right now. So I will be definitely gunning hard, particularly on that procurement piece. It's really interesting what you said about the golden visa. It's golden visa, right? Or thereabouts. I've been thinking about this a lot, and Invest NZ are quite a new entity, and I think there could be some work between Philanthropy New Zealand and Invest NZ to get them together and see how that we can opportunalise that part of that picture. So that's a really good point that you made. But yeah, look, there's lots of things that you guys have said that we all acknowledge, and I think it's actually, and we're all backbenchers, so we're not the ministers, but I think it is really important that we do take this back to talk to our ministers about this is the reality for those that are on the ground. This hasn't changed. What can we actually do to push for this? And maybe it could be that we all have some sort of, whoever the government is, some sort of coalition agreement to look at this, the procurement part around particularly community organisations.
Maybe you'll go out for dinner after this and come up with a shared manifesto. All right, so we're not quite...
We can do that in a lot of areas. It's quite good.
Yes, and actually there's more of that than people probably think. But we're going to come to your questions shortly. A few other areas that I'd like to cover before we come to audience questions. We've heard the Social Investment Agency mentioned a couple of times. Andy, what is your view on the social investment approach?
Look, as I understand it, and I had a couple of meetings with the then head of the Social Investment Agency. It was a little unfortunate what happened. But the idea of getting us out of... One of the other things which we've got, a particularly disease, which is not just a New Zealand disease, is silos. And being able to break some of those silos down, instead of saying, well, this is the education funding that goes to that family and that person, and this is the social welfare funding that goes to that person, this is the OT funding, and they're all split. That is, so the idea of actually, in principle, the idea of using social investment to actually take more of that money away from education, health, whatever, putting it through social investment so it's channeled in the right direction, targeted in the right way. As I had it explained to me, is basically a lot of the time you know exactly who it is that you need to provide that wraparound support and do that. And the one area I will give an example is that I think a lot of particularly our young people, are falling through the cracks between school, which often doesn't do anything for them. It's not their cup of tea. If it fails them, whatever it might be, whatever their circumstances might be, and then where does their life go? And it's that space in particular, and it's seeing some of the wonderful work which is being done in a lot of particularly community organisations I can think of, who are doing amazing work in turning lives around and giving those young people hope, confidence, purpose and skills. That's the kind of thing that, to me, social investment should be trying to make sure that we do, and we fund it. It doesn't fall between I mean, I don't even know which minister it falls between, because we've got a Minister of Education, then we've got Ministers of Tertiary Education. We had two of them before, Polytechs and university sector. So doing it in a holistic way makes sense.
So I think everyone would agree that that level of coordination and strategy is really important. Dana, one of the criticisms has been that this is a very data-driven approach, and even if you have all the great data, if you don't have enough resource being put into the sector, then things aren't going to change. What's your view on that?
Well, if you take this from the social investment agency approach, you are being more efficient and more effective at delivering the outcomes. And so what you actually want is more of the money going into the front line and not sitting around in administration. And for example, we have a number, I don't disagree that driver's licences are actually one of the most important things anybody can have, and for a great deal of reasons. But in my electorate, there are probably 20 or 30 organisations delivering driver licence training. Now, they all report on those contracts. They all report on back to the various agencies and do their monitoring and all the rest of it. And I think that we are wasting money. If we have got $1.5 billion in Tairāwhiti and only half of that hitting the front line, it's just, we've got to get that money working better. And if the communities can do that better and can decide on a more efficient and streamlined approach, then that will be better for all of us.
So Helen, efficiency sounds good, doesn't it?
I said before, I love the idea of the social investment agency, but a lot of things can go wrong. And I think I watched earlier last year when we were having this issue with OT, and the contracts that were involved. I was in the committee and we were being told we're just waiting for social investment agency to tell us what to do. I think it can also stall the maturing of your entire system. So that would be one concern I have with it. And another concern is I think it's another version of counting widgets in a way that not everything has the biggest number, but it's still really important. Anything long-term, how do you possibly give it a number when it is something that is your hardest people who are really difficult to get the results with? So I think there are some real dangers in it. And finally, I'd be really watching in the next government who gets the portfolio, because I have this other portfolio, the sexual and family violence one. It's a cluster portfolio. And I am concerned that it's fine if Jacinda gets child poverty, because she can tell all her ministers what to do. But when you give it to a minister outside cabinet, and that is one that we've got serious issues with, when we give it to somebody who's powerless, we have a problem. And if that happens to social investment, I'll be worried.
So those are some genuine concerns. I guess the question is, what is Labor's alternative approach? Because
I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not saying that. I'm saying those are the things you've got to look at intelligently and critically and keep your eye on, especially in the sector. But I think social investment agency is a good idea. I just think it has to be delivered well.
Didn't you just say before to give things a shot?
Yes.
And have a go?
And I think we should. But that doesn't mean I'm going to turn off my eyes and ears or not think about the dangers of it and the learning.
So how do we then determine whether it's working? How do we, let's try and agree on, how do we know whether this approach is working?
You've got to have data. You have to have it. So, for example, you can take the attendance levels at schools. I've got a school in my electorate, 18% of students go to school regularly. You can't tell me that you can't measure a better outcome for that school if you apply things differently and do a different social model that makes sure kids go to school and learn to read and write.
Wouldn't you also agree that there's probably workers on the front line for whom the data-driven approach and the algorithms and the spreadsheets hasn't reflected the day-to-day reality of what they're dealing with in their community?
Potentially, but communities have stepped up and have provided or have gathered the evidence in their communities and know what works for them and know how they can best use the money to deliver the best result and the best outcomes for their people. Okay. And I think they're frustrated because they can see the potential and the opportunity and things aren't happening fast enough. And that's on our watch, and I accept that.
A couple more things before we move to audience questions. The Charities Commission was absorbed into the Department of Internal Affairs, and we're now talking about charity services, and my understanding is that there's no education aspect to that, when previously there were promises that it was. And people in the sector have said that we're now dealing with a regulator rather than an organisation that's actually responsible for the development and the health of the sector. So, Laura, you're nodding. Have you heard some of those concerns, and what's your take on that?
I'm going to be honest, I actually hadn't heard a lot about it before planning for the panel tonight. But what I liken it to straight away is something like WorkSafe, how it's meant to be the regulator and the advisor, and it's really hard to go and get advice from somewhere that could actually slap you with an infringement. So it does really concern me that the way that this is set up, and I do think it's something that we should look at, because I know that for something like that to be effective, there needs to be that separation, or you're just not going to go to it for advice, are you? Like, that is the genuine reality. So yeah, I think there does need to be that separation. And look, with WorkSafe, that is definitely where we're heading, to make sure that WorkSafe isn't just the teeth for really serious things, but it's actually somewhere you can go to for advice, and you're not going to be told off. You're going to be actually helped as to how you can comply. And I think, it just really depends on how it operates, but it is concerning. And if anyone's had any specific examples with it, I'd really love to hear those as well.
Kayla, what are your thoughts as someone who's been a leader in the sector?
To be honest, I think New Zealand governments tend to be somewhat obsessed with restructuring things and putting things in different places. I don't think it really matters, as long as there are appropriate guardrails in place, so that when the sector is coming for advice, it is clear that that is going to be taken in a supportive capacity and not a punitive one. I think there's lots of possibilities for that to transpire, as long as there's strong direction from the top and appropriate safeguards and guardrails are there.
Do any of the other panellists have views on how we can increase education and support within the sector and balance that with regulatory functions?
I'm hesitant to dominate your mic again,
Go
but
for it.
I was really interested to look at the English system, where there's actually quite strong regulation around charities in comparison to New Zealand, and yet they have a system for what they call their KICs, which is the community interest companies, which are the social enterprise model, which is light-handed in its regulation and encourages people. It had hardly any prosecutions. And I think it's just about the thing that you're trying to do. There is a need for the integrity of charities for us to have a tax avoidance arm, and that's incredibly important, because we have really good law here on avoidance. Basically, if IRD says it's avoidance, it's avoidance. If we have that actually create the integrity, then we should be able to do the other work with charitable services that is very different in kind. So I just think we haven't had either going on particularly effectively. We're falling between the stools.
Mike?
Thanks. I think it's really concerning if we've got this erosion of trust happening. Now, there does need to be some accountability, but not to the point that it actually creates what we're seeing as this erosion of trust, and where actually it starts to impact the community volunteer sector, and they actually stop wanting to do the work because of actually all this other regulation on top of it. So yes, there needs to be accountability, but we need to see that education piece going there as well, and kind of working together, not to.
Finally, before we move to questions, yes, go for it.
Can I just suggest again that sort of idea of we're actually again working together, you collectively would know more about this than any government bureaucracy or agency would. So empowering you to do some of that education probably be kind of useful thing. And can I just relate one example? I mean, Helen, you said that the Poor Charities Commission is overburdened. So the one example which I had, we had a trust which had been doing a lot of work, and then it came to a point where the funding stopped because the funding was from a gaming machine arrangement, and the places that we were operating with changed provider, and we wrote to the Charities Commission and said, look, it's nil, and it will remain nil until something changes. No, you've got to do a full return every year, even if it's nil, even if it's nil, even if it's nil. And we've already told you it's going to be nil. No, you've got to keep on doing it. This is the kind of nutty thing that we have in our bureaucracies. Zero trust and bureaucracy, and that's really unhelpful. So we just let the thing go because that was the sense we weren't going to keep on wasting time on it. So they might be overburdened, but if they actually use their resources in a more constructive way, that would be really, really helpful.
Finally, before we come to questions, being part of a charitable organisation means you cannot make advocacy your prime reason for existence. There have been lots of interesting cases here about the blurred lines between how much advocacy can we do, can we use our voice politically, etc. And that puts charities in a position where sometimes they can't speak on the issues that they actually know about. So what are your thoughts on the status quo? Is this a risk for charities?
It's a really, really hard question. It's a hard question legally. We have cases that go both ways. And it does require us to have a really grown-up conversation about what the point is of the organisations. But I think, I talked about an ecosystem. I think you need different models so that things that are advocacy can sit alongside. I'm not sure what the answer is to this one in terms of whether you include advocacy, Greenpeace versus Family First. You can't have it both ways. And that's currently what we have. We have it both ways.
Laura, your party values freedom of speech. How do you think about this vexed issue?
Yeah, look, I do think it is really challenging, and there has been decisions made by the courts either which way. When I think of a charitable organisation, though, I don't think of large protests on a hub bridge or something like that. So I think there is that difference between the two, and I think we do need to do some work on making it pretty clear where that line is, just to protect the charitable sectors. But maybe it is a bit about, like Helen said, maybe if you are a charity and you want to have an advocacy wing, maybe that is separate. Like maybe that is actually set up as a separate entity so that you could leverage both your voice or, you know, and I'm not a legal expert, so
sure.
I can't really say, but I think they do need to be different. I don't think that they can be the same.
I mean, most small, so the larger outfits obviously might even be able to fund that separately and make it a private thing, but obviously the majority of organisations that just want to have a voice in their local community won't have the resources to do that, yeah.
I have a very strong view on this, actually. And so does Opportunity, because one of our priorities is ensuring a resilient democracy in Aotearoa, and the role that the charitable and not-for-profit sector plays in our civic space is actually really important. And for some people, you might not think that leading a protest across the Auckland Harbour Bridge is democratic, but I do think it is. And I would argue also that whether you're an environmental charity or you're involved in delivering mental health services, you actually tend to know what's best in the delivery of those services. And therefore your voice is really important and government should want to hear it. So I don't have a problem with charitable or not-for-profits engaging advocacy because I think they're offering up good messages and good suggestions to government.
Where is the line where it crosses from advocacy into, for example, political activism, and where is our level of comfort around that distinction? And the supplementary to that would be, what if that's the primary purpose of the organisation? Are we okay with that? Or are we okay, it's like that's only 30% of what you're spending your time and money on. That's like, how do we make those judgments?
Would you like me to answer
Sure,
that?
go for it. Anyone.
Well, I think there's a pretty clear line between engaging in policy advocacy versus political advocacy. And from my perspective, coming from an advocacy organization, we will offer ideas up to any party. We'll work with anybody. We're completely political independent. That doesn't mean that the advocacy work we're doing is not important. It's actually crucial. And I think that's the line for us, you know? And I don't think that's that hard to navigate.
All right, more feedback to take back to your parties. Let's come to audience questions now. Please wait for a microphone to reach you because we have lots of people joining us on the live stream and we want to make sure they can hear the question that's being asked. So feel free to pop your hand up and we will bring a microphone to you. Eleanor down the front.
Jehan, can we get some more water too?
Sure. Can we please ask the team for some more water as we have a coughing outbreak bursting out on stage? If we can get a jug up ASAP, that would be great. Over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Eleanor Keita from Community Foundations of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I just want to thank you all, first of all, for being here and you know, being before us to answer a lot of really pertinent questions that are really important to our sector. I'm going to start with a statement and then a couple of questions, if I may. Australia, Ireland, the UK and Singapore have all recently developed national strategies in partnership with philanthropy and the not-for-profit sector to deliberately create an enabling environment for giving and philanthropy to thrive. So questions. Have you already undertaken any policy work in this space? And if not, is this something you'd be interested to explore cross-party in partnership with the sector?
Okay, a philanthropy strategy, is that something any of our parties have considered, and are you interested in working with the sector? Laura?
Eleanor, have you been in our inbox this week? Because, yes, I've seen the emails. Look, I'm going to answer it straight up. It's not something that we've done. It's not any work policy-wise that the ACT parties had, but I think it's a really good idea. So, yeah.
Anyone else?
Can I just say, I think it's a great idea as well. Sorry, I think it's a great idea as well. No, we haven't done any work on that yet, but certainly it's another thing to take back and say we're working, and I did like that you said working together. The more things we can do working together, and the other thing, New Zealand does lots of things badly, one of them is strategy. Yeah. We don't do strategies well at all. You know, you probably do strategies well yourself, but as a nation we don't, so the more things we can be strategic and cross-party, and have got some longevity to them, ka pai.
One more and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yes.
Yep, Helen?
Yes, I have looked at this and I have developed a strategy, and I hope Eleanor knows that because I've been talking to her and others about that strategy. There's some incredible people in the sector who have also worked on parts of that. So I think I talked about an ecosystem. I think we need an ecosystem. We actually, while we have giving, we actually don't have enough philanthropic money in the country, and there's also this huge opportunity coming for bequests. And then I keep on banging on about social enterprise. I think it is part of an ecosystem, and I don't think we have the right structures at the moment, so I've developed a bill in that area.
Yep.
I think there is so much we can learn from the UK, but not everything is applicable. So yes, I have and I will, and I'd love to work with other parties, and they could just take mine, couldn't they?
All right, thank you very much. Another question?
Kia ora. My name's Kate Frickberg. Thank you very much for your really thoughtful responses and the collegiality. It's really lovely to see non-divisive politics, and I'm really hoping that this question won't be divisive either. How does Te Tiriti o Waitangi figure in how you want to work with the sector?
I can give you one example because I've been dying talking about social enterprise. I think that our iwi are actually very well suited with the settlements, etc., and the new businesses to move into that sector in a way that we haven't really had lined up in terms of a culturally responsive legal framework. I think that there are huge amounts of potential to do that work, and I think we've talked about contracting, we've talked about localism. I think all of those really need to be matched with an understanding of the partnership under the treaty.
Mike?
Thanks. Te Tiriti is our founding document, and it needs to be at the heart of any conversation that we have with the sector and any sector.
Tana?
Well, coming from an electorate that's 54% Māori, it would be fair to say that there's a lot of investment that goes in our community into working with iwi and hapu and whānau in particular around a lot of different approaches. And we've seen, just to give you an example, an enormous contribution voluntarily from iwi and hapu following cyclones and floods. And we've seen also the devastation to their marae and their whare across the region. And you know, just one of the things we've done is we have shifted 5 marae out of flood zones. We have worked with them. They've designed it. They've done all of the work, and we've also contributed to replenishing everything that they do. So supporting them around the psychosocial help and all of the other bits they need to clean up and to help their people as well. It's just one of the examples, but I do know we put a huge amount of money into mental health, into all sorts of projects and programs run by iwi-based organisations with a tikanga lens and a mātauranga lens as well, so that it's very much a continued part of the process.
Thank you. Another question from this side of the room. Oh, you want to go? Yeah, go for it. Sure, go for it. Yes, we can go through everybody if we need to, yes.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Look, I think that is a really community-based decision depending on your community and who you are. And I think some of the incredible work that iwi are doing out in the ground is really valued. One example I can give you would be probably with OT. They have, particularly in Whakatane, which I don't think that's quite your electorate down there. It is still? Oh, yeah. They have... It sure is. They did a partnership there with iwi to basically handle all of the reports of concern themselves. So that's for any child though, it's not just for Māori, but there is predominantly, obviously, a Māori population. And they are now delivering those initial services on the ground, and they're doing an incredible job, which goes to show that community knows how to deliver better than government. So I think there's no blanket answer for me being with ACT, but I think it is really important that each individual community decides how they will, whether they honour Te Tiriti, how they do that, how they partner with locals. But again, it's about localism and the communities themselves.
Anyone else? Kayla?
I can say for opportunity, application of a treaty lens in this context is really important. We acknowledge it's a foundational document within New Zealand's constitutional structure. And I would actually argue that it's particularly relevant to this sector because we're serving our communities. And to that end, with respect to your question, Eleanor, about the national strategy, my view, and I think the view of opportunity would be that would need to be designed with a treaty lens in mind, particularly because it's likely to give us better outcomes.
Two things from me. One are just picking up Dana's comments around emergency management. So we're actually going through the process at the moment of emergency management legislation. And one of the roles that a lot of, particularly Marae, play in emergency management is enormous. And so making sure that they are supported to do that, as well as everybody else who voluntarily helps out in emergencies, that's really, really important. That's not directly necessarily charitable, but it is certainly saying actually we need to be working together and supporting the people who are actually supporting communities when they are struggling and in times of stress. The other one is, the treaty at its heart is about coming together and working together. And so, whether it's an iwi-based, hapu-based, or just a Māori-based charitable proposition, absolutely we should be backing it, 100%.
Thank you. Another question from this side of the room. Okay, we'll go down the back. Sue.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for all your comments. I really appreciate the collegiality as well, and I appreciate you all coming and sharing your perspectives. We talked about the review that the Minister of Finance put forward last year, and that she then stepped back from it. But she actually stepped back from the proposal to tax the business income of charities, but she didn't step back from the proposal to create a new category of donor-controlled charities and impose various complicated tax rules on them. In my view, that would be a very significant mistake. We will be going down a rabbit hole that other jurisdictions demonstrate doesn't work, doesn't encourage distribution from accumulated funds, and actually just creates a poacher and gamekeeper mindset that actually makes things worse rather than better. I just wondered if that was still on the table. I know IRD are really keen on it, but it would be really great to know that they weren't going to go ahead.
I think that's a question for the Minister of Finance, not for the backbenchers of the parties. But no, honestly, I couldn't give you an answer that would give any credibility to your question. So, but we can certainly ask the question and refer back, definitely.
Thank you. Down the back. Yes, go for it.
Kia ora, Andrew from the Salvation Army. A number of you reflected the sentiment about organisations not fighting over the same pot of money, and that there should be more collegiality and more work to develop programs and things in cooperation with our peers in this room. Even from my relatively young observation, that's been the narrative for the last 10, 20, even more years. So at a policy level, what levers would you pull to see that sort of hope and dream and vision start to become more and more of a reality than what we are seeing in terms of many organisations, probably even us included, fighting over that same pot, developing that very risk-averse sort of posture, and often, as you're saying, seeing poor outcomes as a result?
I'm happy to lean into that. I think there's a few simple, you grow the pie, right? That's what we do. We increase charitable giving in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there's a few simple things that we could do that to align with other OECD countries in terms of our tax and incentive structures, changes to the AIP visa pathway. There's a lot of different ways that we could be attracting more philanthropic investment. And it's not hard to do, and I think we ought to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think it's not always about more money. I think it's about working together better. And you're right, like there has been a vision for a very long time. I think it comes down again to that whole procurement piece, how you even go out to tender with community. And it could be that government's role is looking to co-collaborate, to actually get the organisations on the ground together. But I don't want that to turn into government dictating too much control over what it is that you're delivering. But I think there has been a couple of examples where communities have done it quite well. There's one in Porirua, and that's led by an iwi, but it's a bunch of different organisations. If you're here, feel free to put up your hand. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. Our Social Services Committee is planning to visit, which is great. But that community there are doing it particularly well, where they've managed to get together and approach government to say, we are the organisations on the ground, this is what we're seeing and this is what we need. And I think if we could get some more of that from grassroots would be amazing, rather than government leading it. But I do think, again, with government procurement, we could do a piece where we allow, or we try and get delivery to be from multiple different partners together, and to show some sort of business model or proposal together. But yeah, would that actually work? I don't know. You guys are the ones on the ground, so you might tell me, no, that just won't work at all. But I think it could be an idea.
I'm presuming that you're already talking about access to funding from government and local government in this instance, just to confirm that, because obviously there's a lot of other revenue sources that charities get, which are not those two. So I think probably to take the point that was made earlier about a strategy, we've got to be really clear about what it is that we're actually trying to, what the government's trying to buy, and I don't think government's particularly good at doing that in some places, or what a council's trying to buy. And sometimes aligning the two will be kind of useful. The danger of trying to do that is that they could take far too long and be too complicated, but at least having some clarity about what we're trying to buy. And I think there's also, in what I've seen, I was both as mayor and a councillor in this city anyway, there is a lot of collaboration between organisations which work in, if you like, related fields. So some clarity around, again, it's a working together. So it's not a, saying, well, you want to buy this and we come with our hands out and they come with their hands out in this competition, but actually trying to work out what the best way of actually delivering those particular services might be. Possibly it's just a relationship thing. Not easy, but that might be the best way of doing it.
Thanks for your question. It's really good. I think for all the time I've been sort of involved with local government and now within central government, you see always the pots are oversubscribed, and the more that local government or central government pulls out, the more subscribed it becomes, all right? And it just gets worse and worse, and actually we sometimes see the pot get smaller. So it's just not helping anyone. And so what we need to look at is two things really. How do we grow that pot to make it bigger to actually enable more people to actually receive funding? But also how can government not always pull out and actually do more in this space, so we're not doing it, so the community sector is not doing it instead of government, but doing it together.
It was a great question, thank you. What I'd just say is the government only has so much money, and that can only go so far. And I think for us in New Zealand, the opportunity is to find, and I like your point about overseas investment and Investing Z and the investor visa, because there is a lot of money washing around globally. And we don't do a good job of getting it into our country to support either our charities or our businesses or our entrepreneurs. And I think if there is a way that the government could help us perhaps to support that Invest NZ, the work that's being done to help all sorts of businesses. Currently we only focus on the business side of it, but certainly, you know, I ran an organisation whereby we were better globally known than we were known in New Zealand. And one of the things we did was start a foundation in America to raise money. And I raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for different organisations over the years as part of my job. And the overseas money as a tax write-off in America is phenomenal. It is beyond anything we can think of. It is charities and as organisations being able to tap into that is a huge opportunity, but we just don't know enough about how to get through the system to do it. And I think that's where a real opportunity lies for us.
I might have misunderstood the question, but I think you were talking about different organisations providing similar services and there being competition between them and a lot of scarcity mentality, basically, which I've seen. And I've also seen the movement into areas, so somebody will be providing a service and then that won't be funded and then they'll morph into doing something else, just basically to survive. But it's not necessarily that great for the people who are getting those services because suddenly there's no continuity and then I've seen people hop from charity to charity or from service provider to service provider, which again I don't think is good, and I have already talked about that precarious work situation. Some of this I think I got warned about when the government changed, that as there was less money, people would fight with each other for what was left. So I think I've seen that all my life in areas that's a really dangerous phenomenon, because we're all good people, and actually it just is something we have to meet with enough. We need to meet with enough money, a good relationship which is consistent with government, and not treating the sector as a chance to pay people less to do more. I think some of that just is real. I think it's false economy because of what the things I just described I saw happening.
Thank you, Helen. All right, we need to wrap up. Thank you for your questions, but I'd like to ask each of you to tell us one thing that the people in this room and their organisations can do to help you in your work, to help you advocate for them and their communities. Who'd like to kick us off?
I'll start. The one thing you can do is tell me things that you think will help and write to me and say so. I have written up a policy proposal, and it is a whole policy, but it doesn't, what I've found is I've gone around and I've talked to people and they'll say, do you know this about our tax law and what it does and how stupid it is? And actually, you can lose important pieces of the puzzle. So it would be really good to hear from you if you have something that you think is a bright idea or you think it's a mistake in the system, so I can glue it in to the plan that I am proposing. You probably don't know how little people on this stage can know about the area. And we're all inquisitive, we're all learning. Please tell us how we can make this better.
Thanks, Helen.
I'm pretty much just going to echo what Helen just said, and I think it's really important just to have that communication, so we're aware of it. Like I'm, as well as being an MP, also on a board of a community group, so I know the struggles. I've been on trusts, and I know how hard it is. But that's only one wee part of the sector, and it's actually trying to get so many more of the voices coming through. So as we do develop our policies moving into the election, we're actually hearing the voice, which I think is.
To do what he's done to it. Yeah, I agree. Reach out to us. Everybody is thinking about policy right now. We've got more resources as far as our team and our research team that are actually looking at things. So, and I know being in a small party, I cover off like way too many portfolios to ever be really well clued up on everything. So please reach out to us. There'll be a lot of different candidates out and about for various different parties. Invite them to see what you're doing and actually get involved. And I just say try and invite everyone. You might be surprised with your political leanings and try and be as apolitical as possible, because I think people really do understand better when they go and actually see what's happening on the ground. I know that for me, that makes a massive difference when I do that outreach. So get in touch, invite us, the MPs sitting here, other candidates that you see popping up in your areas to come and see the work that you're doing, and that will really help. And all the issues, obviously.
Thanks, Laura. Andy?
Yeah, look, I completely agree with what's already been said in terms of working together. And I'll put a little challenge here to all of us. I mean, if you are engaging with us collectively, and you're thinking about strategy and about the way that we work together and how we can make the whole arrangement work better. And obviously we've got some ideas already, and we've canvassed some of those ideas. But if we can actually have a policy which actually, ideally, was agreed by everybody, every party, and that no party was out there going, hey, look at us, we're first, and everybody else going, yeah, well, we were 2 days behind you. We were all saying the same thing. That'd be kind of nice. So that we're actually all saying pretty much the same thing, because that's the way that gives you some certainty. Frankly, the more policies we can do that way, the better it will be for New Zealand. But so working together, I think, and us working together, I think would also be a really good thing.
Kayla?
I don't want to say the same thing as everybody else, so I'm going to say you could consider giving us your party vote in the election for opportunity, because we'd love to make some change for you in Parliament.
And last word to Dana.
Well, I just want to know if Andy's going to go and have the conversation with his illustrious leader about working together across all the parties and see how that goes. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Well, we managed to get to the last minute before the gloves coming off.
Had to get it in. Look, I'm sitting here thinking that I agree with everything everybody else said, apart from the bit about giving a party vote to the Opportunity Party. But I want to say, come with some solutions. Don't come with problems. We know everyone's got problems. What we really want to know is what are the things that make the biggest difference to you, that maybe don't cost any money, maybe they cost a lot of money. Ones that don't cost money are better. But honestly, come with solutions, because that gets you way up the pecking order really quickly.
We've loved the collegiality. We like the fact that everyone's on the same page, and hopefully you're able to take these ideas and suggestions back to your parties and use them to shape and inform the discussion that you'll be having around policy in the lead up to this year's election. So thank you very much for giving us a very decent chunk of your time this evening. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I'll hand back to Holly to formally close our event.
Thank you very much. And this has been fascinating. I've been surprised with the collegiality, to be fair. But it is a really good thing, because I think that cross-party commitment to the community and volunteer sector is actually really critical for us to be able to thrive. And I'm hoping that through a conversation today, you've had a chance to see some of the complexity that we navigate in the work that we do as well. Some of the contradictions. I heard a number of times talking about the amount of money that is spent in back office, in our administration. Totally appreciate that we absolutely do that. And we do that because of government compliance obligations. We're required to spend that money to be legal, and so there is an opportunity, right, for us to be able to work better with our government. I'll tell you another thing, data collection and analysis also costs a lot of money. And so if we start going down that track, we're looking at even more money being spent in back offices. So I just implore you to listen to the people in the room when you have any opportunity, and for our whānau here to make those approaches and to share the things that we're doing and the wins that we're making, because you are all doing incredible work. So thank you so much for coming along, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. And I will take a brief moment just to close with karakia. Kia hora marino, ki piki te kaha, ki mau te aroha, ki tau te rangi mārie ai. May the sea be calm, may you remain strong, may love be constant, and may peace be with you. Tihei Moriora.